Welcome on to the first three-man team outlook that we have done in some time. But I've enjoyed my appearances on the Pistons Pulse so much that I wanted to bring on both Omari Sankofa II and also bring on Bryce as well to talk Detroit Pistons basketball. How y'all doing?
What's up,
We're
Nate? How
great,
are you?
man. Happy to
There
be
we go.
here.
Yes, I got it. This is my classic move when I have two guests on to ask them how they're doing and have them both answer simultaneously. I derived just a totally ridiculous amount of satisfaction from that. So let's begin here. I think the place to start is just with what took place last year. And so start with you, Bryce. What was it that made these guys so much better than expected a year ago? And then so let's start with that, and then we can talk a little bit about what took place in the playoffs and kind of what they need to take the next step.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to throw shade at anything before last season, but it was just like a foundation of like competitive, competent basketball that made sense with a roster around a really good former number one overall pick that made sense. Trajan Langdon comes in, he gets veterans in the room that play a lot of games. The one common factor when we go 2 off seasons ago that we saw with Trajan's additions were those guys all averaged a lot of games played, and in some capacity, those guys provided floor spacing. And that's what all three of Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, Tobias Harris did. And then obviously JB Bickerstaff comes in and just sets a foundation of competitiveness, defense, like all of that, and how the team went about their business. And I think we saw that play out on the floor. And it was a lot of fun to analyze and watch and podcast about every week compared to what Omari and I have been doing over the last few years.
Yeah, and then Amari, what were some of your takeaways from their first playoff appearance in some time, their first playoff victory since 2008, just as far as what worked for this team, and then also what they might be missing as far as taking the next step in the East?
Yeah, I was in eighth grade last time they won the playoff game, by the way. So I'm gonna just throw that out there. No, I think that big series really, like I don't want to just reduce it to like the bow on top of a great season because anytime you lose in 6 games in the first round, like there's a frustration aspect to that. But they played the Knicks 10 times last season, 4 in the regular season, 6 in the playoffs. They went 5-5. And it took a Jalen Brunson game winner at the buzzer, for the Knicks to advance in 6 games. So I think you walk away from that series, just feeling like this team is legit. Everything they've done over the last 3-4 months is real. They're here, like they can rise to the moment. They got both games, I believe, at MSG. Couldn't get one at home, but just to go into that type of environment and not blink essentially, and it's your first time there. Like I thought it just really solidified everything that had come before, right? Like we're not just a team that snuck into the playoffs, won 44 games, just over 500. Like we have an upward trajectory, and we can actually go toe to toe with these teams. So I think it's just legitimized what came before. Like, okay, they have Cat, they have Brunson, but we have our guys, and we can go toe to toe with them for 6-7 games.
What stood out to me the most is how much they ran. And that was not
Mhm.
what Cade Cunningham's reputation was. He was supposed to be this deliberate Luka style ball handler. And I thought it hurt them some in the playoffs that he just had to play so many minutes and they just couldn't keep him off the floor because they couldn't score. It hurt that. But he was really a devastating transition engine. Part of that was pushing it up the floor to shooters. Part of it was just grabbing and going and just being a real force with the ball that the other team had to react to. And so I thought that was something that really stood out to me. And then, yeah, just the level of competitiveness that JB Bickerstaff was able to elicit from these guys, whether it's getting Jalen Duren to really take the next step and be a positive defensively, although he still has ways to go, or getting guys like Tim Hardaway Jr. or Malik Beasley or Jaden Ivey to have some of the best defensive seasons of their careers. So, Bryce, let me turn to you here. Vis-a-vis last year, with some of the new additions that they've made, what are they missing with what they lost last year, but what are they getting in what they've gained, and how might that affect the things that made them good last year or the weaknesses that maybe held them back from being a top 4 type of team?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the easiest way for listeners to kind of see this picture that don't follow the Pistons day in and day out, like O2 and myself, is at the end of last year, after J.I. got hurt and into the playoffs, you're essentially taking off Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Dennis Schroeder and inserting Jaden Ivey, who got his leg broke after 30 games. Duncan Robinson and Karis LeVert. And so that's kind of the trio that's out and the new trio that's in, if you want to look at it that way. Now, Simone Fontecchio also exited whenever they brought in Duncan Robinson, and that could potentially, we could talk about a hole that kind of opens up. So I think with what Trajan had to deal with the Malik Beasley situation, because it sounded like they were going to bring him back, having to pivot to the plan of finding some other floor spacer, he did the best he could, bringing in Duncan Robinson. Obviously, that's not necessarily what LeVert is known for. And, I think in the outline you sent us, it was like, hey, what are some stats people may not be familiar of? Jaden Ivey shot 40% from three last year in his 30 games before the injury, 41% on 5 attempts. I don't know that people realize that was the level that he was shooting the basketball from outside. So my point with all of that is a huge part of their success was real floor spacing around Cade Cunningham. And because of that, Jaden Ivey replicating that to some extent, Duncan Robinson replicating Malik Beasley to some extent, and not having any fallback from those guys or big time injuries, to me is really important to keep that floor spacing around non-shooters like Jalen Duren, Asar Thompson. Ron Holland's improved a little bit in preseason, but we have to see it for a substantial size to call him to call him anything other than a non-floor spacer right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Omari, how are the departures and additions going to change the strengths of this team?
Yeah. I think the biggest question really is just the 3-point shooting aspect. That's because we had, Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr., who are volume 3-point shooters, and you replace them with Karis, who, like Bryce said, is not a volume shooter, but he can knock them down. And then Duncan, who is on the opposite end, like he's going to get them up at a pretty high rate. But there's still a lot of 3-point production to replace, even some of Simone Fontecchio too. He had a bit of a down year, but he's still like a designated proven shooter, which outside of Tobias, they don't really have at the 4 right now, although Ron's knocking a few more down. So, I think he'll take steps there. But I guess that's the biggest question for me is like, who else replaces those 3-pointers? And I think Ivy, coming off of a year where he shot 40% from 3 last year, not on THJ volume, but he almost is like an offseason addition too, just because he missed most of the turnaround last year, and now he comes back and he can replace some of that shooting. I don't know if he's going to be THJ level volume, but they replaced the rest of it as they could. Like I think going from Beasley to Duncan Robinson's probably a best case scenario, especially considering like I think that Beasley news came out like the day before free agency, so they had maybe 30 hours to come up with like an entirely new plan. Where previously they were like, we can bring back Bees and Dennis Schroeder as well. So like outside of that, like I think they got bigger. Like you look at Karis LeVert, who's about 6'6", Duncan 6'7". Like those guys are bigger than THJ and Shooter and Bees, obviously, so that can help them defensively. But the 3-point shooting is probably the bigger question mark, because the spacing was a huge part of their success last year. Cade had room to move really for the first time in his career. And, when you also have guys you're bidding around like Asar Thompson and Jalen Duren, like that shooting is going to have to come from somewhere. So,
yeah, for me, I think the transition, a lot of that was Beasley pulling. He had one of the greatest shooting seasons in NBA history, particularly when you exclude Steph Curry from the mix. And so, he was just incredible. And I think Duncan Robinson has had moments in his career where he's looked like that. And, maybe he can be a little bit better as a passer, but I also think he's going to struggle some defensively, like, especially with fouling and getting isolated. I think Beasley, he could fall asleep certainly off the ball, but also is not someone who is just going to be an absolute post out there. And I thought, we'll see whether JB Bickerstaff can work his magic on Robinson. It's not like Eric Spoelstra is a bad defensive coach either. But I think for the running, a lot of what they were doing was, let's throw it ahead to Malik and he's going to pull it before the defense is set. They were number 1 in the NBA in running off of opponent misses last year, 32.7% of the time. They were pretty middling in terms of their transition efficiency, but that's still very good relative to half court, and part of that was they were taking a lot of threes. So I think they can run this year, but it's just going to look a little bit different because if Holland's going to play more, he's relentless. Asar Thompson is going to have an even bigger role. He's pretty relentless, pushing it as well. Ivy as well. So they have more guys who can really push it down your throat, maybe force turnovers to get out and run and finish at the basket. I don't know that they're going to be the same type of, Tim Hardaway Jr. is another guy who's just a real quick trigger. They didn't replace him in the same way. Like Karis LeVert is the guy replacing him who doesn't shoot it the same way. So I think they're going to be just running to just get to the basket, then maybe get the offensive rebound if they miss a layup in transition rather than going for threes on the break.
Nate, I think Asar is a huge name there that you brought up that has to be mentioned whenever you talk about the transition, because I mean, offensively, that's the best value he provides right now. O2 over on the Pistons Pulse, we've been talking about, the way they're trying to use him as an initiator in the half court and how that's looked and some of the struggles. But there's no question his defensive impact, his defensive disruption, and then how that turns into offense. And I am interested to see one thing. You mentioned Cade in transition. I think when Asar is pushing pace, even Ron, JD, pushes transition at times. Now this allows Cade Cunningham. Maybe Cade Cunningham's the recipient in transition, running the floor, getting a kick ahead, catch and shoot. Or another thing we've seen is Cade run the floor, and if he likes a post up, a matchup he likes, he gets a quick transition post up. Cade is a bigger guard. So I think you're right pointing out that it may be a little bit different because you don't have those real movement three-point shooters in THJ and Beasley. But I think Asar and Ron, the young guys, are really driving forces of this transition play as well, along with Ivy, because again, the best thing he does is run really fast and, get out and move. So I would imagine they're going to lean into that transition game.
Yeah, we've seen some of that during preseason too. They really want to pair Ron and Asar together.
Yeah.
And they've had some wrecking crew moments. I think offensively they're gonna have to shift things a little bit, but especially if we have JI for the full season. I mean, this team is built to run. So I guess we'll see if it's as efficient as they were last year, because they were a decent offensive team last year, but they have the personnel to make that shift.
Bryce, what else stood out to you last year as far as what they did schematically on either side of the floor? And do you, based on what we've seen early on in camp, do you expect any changes to that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one thing is Cade on the ball, so ball dominant, which you want the ball in Cade's hands because he's so good. But I feel like here in the preseason, we've seen a little bit more off the ball actions. Like the other game, he came off an Iverson cut and then backdoored and got an easy bucket at the rim. It's like, okay, if we can manufacture easy looks for Cade Cunningham, that's big time offense, because a lot of Cade's career, we've seen him just have to work his butt off to even get a quality look. So that's one thing I'm looking for. And then also they operated through Jalen Duren at the top of the key, either, 2x2 actions, 3x1 actions, but him in the middle of the floor at the top of the key, operating a DHO, whatever. And he had good chemistry with guys like Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr. So I'm interested to see what is the chemistry with a Duncan Robinson, with a Karis LeVert, with a Jaden Ivey, and do they continue to lean into that? Because it is a kind of a tertiary skill that Duren has that maybe not everybody realizes, is he is a guy that not necessarily put it on the deck, but he passes the ball decently well in those situations. And then one last thing, Nate, that I'm always looking at, how do JD and Asar share the floor together? One of my biggest critiques at times with those two is they can end up occupying the same space in the half court. Yeah. And that just can't continue to be an issue here moving into this season. So I really want to see if JB and staff have been able to figure that, aspect out in terms of spacing.
Yeah. Omari, anything to add on that?
No, not a whole lot. I would just say that, I think Asar, especially is going to be a key guy. Like one thing that they did last year to kind of make it work with JD is just put the ball in Asar's hands. And I think we saw some chemistry with them in the playoffs. So again, they're going to do more of that. But I also want to say, to Bryce's point, I think Duren averaged 3.5 assists and like half the turnovers in the playoffs. And you look at his playmaking every year and it has gotten better and better. So, that's another guy, like, again, you're talking about, if we're not spacing the floor the same way, like where does that offense come from? Like I could see Duren taking a step forward, just being that type of hub as well.
Well, so let's stay with you, Omari. Do you see any players you think are going to be a lot better, or any guys among the holdovers that you're worried might have a regression this year?
I think Asar could only go up. You look at how he started last season, and his rookie season got cut off with blood clots. He didn't have a summer, didn't have a preseason, didn't have training camp. Made his debut at the end of November, and then essentially had to play himself into shape. He had maybe 3 weeks, of practice to get acclimated. And by the end of the year, especially in the playoffs, he was like their second most important player. He was the primary assignment on Brunson, and gave Brunson fits to the point to where he was intentionally playing to draw fouls at the start and get him to foul out, because that was the only solution he had. And he's going to have a bigger role this year. One thing that would really jump out to me is just the raw amount of steals and blocks he generates. I actually mentioned this on the pod this morning, Pistons post, but you look at what Dyson Daniels did last year, and I thought him averaging like 3 steals a game really kind of propelled him in the DPOY discussion. Well, Asar averaged 1.7 steals in like 23 minutes, so he's going to be right there with Dyson. And I also think he's a better defender. So you look at what Amin has done in Houston. I think the NBA.com did that coaches poll the other week, and he was one of the top leaders for most improved. I think Asar would be in that group too, just because he's coming off of a full summer, and he's had a full offseason to get himself right. So he's top of my list of guys I think could take a step forward. Also J.I., I think he has nowhere to go but up too. He shot 40% from 3 last year. He always had the potential to be a great shooter, but if he sustains that, you're talking about a really ideal complement for Cade, just with his speed. And they've done a good job of surrounding Cade with athletes, so we didn't really see that transition attack with J.I. in the playoffs. It's a contract year for him too, potentially, depending on what happens with these extensions over the next couple of days. So a lot for him to prove. I'm not too worried about regressions as much for this team, and I don't know if maybe Bryce feels differently about that, but these guys are so young. It's just tough to kind of see where that regression would come from. Maybe if you're talking about some of the older guys, like maybe Tobias, he's in year 15. Maybe he plays fewer minutes or takes a little bit of a step back, but these are all young guys who are on the upswing. So I don't have necessarily an obvious choice for who could be a regression candidate, but Asar and J.I. absolutely taking a step forward.
Yeah, for me, Nate, I'll go JD. I think you mentioned it, and I think rightfully so. We've been pretty critical of JD's defense. You can probably go find a clip from me last season, 25 games into the season, essentially calling for JD to be benched and have to sit and watch how hard Isaiah Stewart and Paul Reed play on the defensive end, and not like a long-term benching, but it just seemed like he needed some sort of a wake-up call to this is how you're supposed to play the game, and then this is the intensity level. And it was funny because, listen, I'm not very often right, but Trajan mentioned it in his postseason presser that 25 games in was kind of a point where JD started to turn the corner. And I think then people saw it down the stretch and in the playoff series with the Knicks. So my point here is not even necessarily offensively. I think JD has an opportunity to really prove himself on the defensive end this year, and can he build off the final 30 games of last year and what we saw in the playoffs? I think that will be huge. And then real quick, I agree with O2 in terms of I don't know that there's a young guy I predict a regression from. I think Tobias is a guy that I think whose role may slowly start to decrease for this team. Now, the counter to that is he's the only true 4-man on this roster, Nate. So I don't know, he may have to continue to play this many minutes. But this man is 33 years old, 32, 33, and entering, I think, his 15th year or something like that. He plays a huge role for them, but I could see, his raw counting stats continuing to kind of decline a little bit at this point of his career.
Yeah, I think he'll just need to be utilized more as a floor spacer than ever, because with the departure of Fontecchio, maybe they'll play LeVert some at the 3, but he's really the only proven shooter that they're going to be putting out there at the forward position.
No, 100%. I mean, I brought up the other night, they played the Bucks, and they actually started Cade on Portis. Bobby Portis was starting at the 4 for Milwaukee, and they started Cade on him defensively. Point being, we all know Cade's the primary initiator, but I don't remember the starting lineup. O2 must have been Duncan.
Cade, Duncan, Stu, Asar,
Like, oh yeah, Stu was at the center. But anyway,
Yeah,
it was another
player was, yeah.
Yeah, it was another wing player, is my point. And so they felt comfortable running out 3 wings with Cade and then letting Cade defend the opposing team's 4. Now, you can't do that against everybody, right? Like, you can't do that against, if Giannis is in the starting lineup or, whoever. But there may be some nights where Cade can play a little bit of that pseudo 4. And I'm interested to see how much they play Asar and Ron at the 4. But to your point, Nate, those are guys that can't space the floor. And right now, this is a team that has non-floor spacing centers. Although we've seen Isaiah Stewart start to bring back the 3-point shooting.
Be still my heart, Bryce. Could this be the year?
It better be, Nate. Like, listen, there was 2 things from last season that kind of like I nitpicked. One was J.I.'s injury, right, which nobody can do anything about. The second was that Isaiah Stewart stopped shooting threes after we spent 3 years of this project of trying to turn him into a little bit of a floor spacer, and not even to play the floor a whole lot. He's not the most athletic guy. He's really good defensively, but I don't know, man. We heard it at media day, and then we've seen it a little bit in preseason, Nate. I think we might be on the right track for it this year.
I mean, that's going to be really important because Holland played some last year, and he was obviously, Fontecchio was totally out of the rotation in the playoffs. Holland did play, but yeah, if you're going to play him, and especially if you want to go with the Terra Twins north of Holland and Asar Thompson, you are just going to need some kind of floor spacing at the 5. So I think they should absolutely explore that. I don't know if Stewart is going to come through. I think he's more of a kind of, all right, if he's wide open, he'll take it kind of guy. Statistically, I have a Mendoza line of about 4 per 36 as a center, where once you're starting to take that many, then you're actually being guarded. Otherwise, you're down in that sort of like Sabonis, Yusuf Nurkic, Valanciunas territory of like, okay, he'll take 1 a game just for shits and giggles, but it's not really something the other team is concerned about. Let's talk about some of the other.
Real quick, Nate,
go
quick.
Yeah.
In 23-24, he took 3.8 and made it at 38%. Now it was only 46 games, but we were like getting close to your Mendoza line, and that's
okay.
I think O2 and I both are kind of excited about an Asar, Ron, Stu trio, mix in whoever else you need, but he would have to be doing that if you're going to play those 3 guys together.
What's the state of Ron Holland's game coming into year 2, Omari?
I think there's a lot of excitement. Like, Ron probably averaged 15 minutes a game last season, but you always notice him out there. I don't think there's ever a game that was like, oh, Ron's been out there however long and he didn't do anything. Like, Ron is always doing something. And he really bought into his role. Defensively, I think JB called him the pest the other week, which I think is a good description of him, but just the energy he played with, and just the way he continually made plays without really always knowing what he was doing. And even now you still see that, but he just has a knack for figuring things out. So now he comes back and, he shot 24% from 3 last year. His shot looks good. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if he's 34% this year, which would be a nice step forward.
Yeah. I mean, that would be massive because in the long term, like, I was totally on board with that pick. I liked him. But of course, his fit with Asar, I have more confidence that he's going to make shots than Asar at some point.
For sure.
Yes.
In the future, Asar, I'm kind of writing off a little bit on that until I see a lot more. Like Ron, I don't think there's anything that's just like straight up busted about his shot. He's had some confidence issues and had some bad moments. But so, yeah, that's exciting if he's even going to take somewhat of a step forward this season.
Yeah. And even with that, like, I think, I won't say it's underrated because he only has 1 year under his belt, but he was a really good finisher last year. And he's got great touch with both hands. Like, he just has a way of just kind of wiggling in between space and like finding those gaps to get the shot off. And even during preseason, like, he's had, pump fake, dribble, get into the floater, finish, make the and one, stuff like that. So you see, like, I'm not saying this is who he's going to be, but you kind of see shades of Jaylen Brown, like, especially early on, where he was more kind of like north-south line drive, but he's a great athlete and, could get to the rim. And, for Ron, it's just continuing what he did last year, like continuing to buy into your role. Maybe you play 20 minutes instead of 15. You're still going to be the energy guy, the guy that they look for a spark if things aren't moving offensively or defensively, whatever it may be. But I see incremental growth for him. I think the 3-point shot's going to be better. I think the finishing is going to be a little bit better. And he's a willing playmaker too. He still has, strides to make as a playmaker, but he's looking for those passes and making a concerted effort to do that as well. So I see him being the same as last year, but just a little bit more polished overall. I think we're going to see the work he's been putting in start to kind of incrementally play off. And like, especially if he can knock down 34% from three, that's really going to open things up for the rest of his game.
What is something that y'all feel doesn't get talked about enough by the people who don't necessarily follow this team every day? Start with you, Bryce.
Dennis Jenkins. No. Dennis Jenkins.
I enjoyed his summer league stylings.
Yeah.
I will say.
Go turn on a preseason game, Nate. I'm telling you, you're gonna like it more. I'm starting to talk crazy over on the Pistons Pulse about where I think he should be in the rotation, not in the rotation, but on the 15-man roster potentially. I don't know. Do people realize how good Cade Cunningham is yet, Nate? Like, do they realize the year he had last year where he averaged 26, 9, and 6 on 47, 36, 85? I don't know. Maybe they do. I think Cade Cunningham and he also defends is the other aspect of Cade Cunningham. Like he's not like a, all defense. Like he's not one of those conversation guys, but he's not one of these guys that you're talking about. Like, oh my gosh, we just have to insulate him with everybody else on the floor. Like some primary initiators around the league. He's always one. I think another one is Isaiah Stewart. I always like to defend Beef Stew, Nate, because I think people remember the LeBron James bloody face, chase him around the court like a madman, or who was it? Was it Eubanks that he got that he punched before the game? Like, I understand. Isaiah Stewart is a good basketball player and very good on the defensive end. And, they flash up the graphics if you ever watch a Pistons game in terms of what opponents shoot at the rim against him. He's got a little more switchability than you would expect. Like, there's just... he is that guy, like the quote unquote enforcer or whatever. But then I think sometimes that takes away from just like how he impacts the game. And you look at the raw box score, he plays 20 minutes a night. He averages 6.6 rebounds. And people are probably gonna be like, what is Bryce talking about? And I guess that's kind of my point a little bit is I think he's a little bit better and more impactful than what people realize sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that sticks out to me is just how they maybe even added to this year. They're just going to come at you in waves. Yeah. I mean, Paul Reed is not even going to be in the rotation, you would think, to start the year unless someone gets hurt. But to have him as a third center that you can bring in is really powerful. And just the number of guys who are will take absolutely no shit on this team and are going to start shit or just really going to be relentless. And I think while I do have some concerns about their shooting and their number 2 creation, to me, the biggest trend in the league over the last 2 or 3 years is just how powerful being really hard to play against can be. Just a lot of size, a lot of athleticism, a lot of depth, relentlessness. We're seeing teams really ramp up the pressure even more. I'm sure that JB's always believed in that. And then you see what the Pacers did last year in Oklahoma City. Like, I'm sure they're going to go to that type of stuff even more. The offensive rebound is back. Transition is even bigger. And while these guys don't have great creation and they don't have great shooting, they're very good at all of those other things. And so that's why I think just they're always going to have a high floor as a team, both with the competitiveness that JB preaches, but also just the athleticism and playing hard every night. And also younger teams don't get hurt as much either. And so those are, if you want reasons for optimism with the Pistons this year, despite the fact they don't have that second star, that's the reason you could think they're going to punch above their weight.
Real quick, Paul Reed, I'm glad you mentioned him, averaged over 5 stocks per 36 minutes last year. And I realized he didn't even play 500 minutes, but that would have led the team per 36. Like, that's more than Asar Thompson. Like Omari said earlier, when Ron Holland's on the floor, when Paul Reed is on the floor. And also Ron Holland absolutely embodies the mentality you just brought up. Like, from day one as a rookie, he embodies like that. Play super hard, like aggressive, doesn't back down, and super confident.
Yeah, he's the definition of scrappy.
Yeah. Omari, who's going to start for these guys, and how's the rest of the rotation going to shake out? What are some of the bench combinations going to look like?
Yeah, projected starting lineup is Kate Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Sar Thompson, Tobias Harris, Jalen Duran. That would have been, I believe, the lineup. Well, they would have had to figure some things out, I think, with THJ still being there. But like, I think those are the 5 guys that they have in mind for that lineup. You see the chemistry with Cade and Duran, so that's not going anywhere. Sorry, you need his defense. And if there's a guy that's going to be that number 2 scorer this season, JI's probably got the best chance. Beyond that, if you're running out a 10-man rotation, the 2 new guys, Duncan Robinson and Karras, are in that group. Isaiah Stewart, who I want to reiterate, is, or maybe from casual fans, doesn't really match who he is as a player or as a person. He's the backbone of this team, and also just one of the nicest guys. I've had the pleasure of dealing with an NBA, like genuinely nice guy, like always very, respectful, like almost would even say mild mannered behind the scenes, but a little bit different on the court. But he'll be in that group. And then if you're going with 2 more, like Ron would, that's my guess, to probably round out a 9-man rotation. And if you're going 10 deep, then you could go a few different ways, right? Javonte Green, like he can knock down threes, athlete, make some defensive plays. You could get him in there. I think, Sass, he's kind of lost his role a bit, just with JI and Cade, but he could shoot it. Like you've got some other options in there, but more than likely, I think that's probably a 9-man rotation with Ron. Ronnie got that rotation.
Yeah.
So no traditional backup point guard, you think? If to start off, it'll just be like Ivy on the second unit and Levert, and you kind of ball handling by committee.
That's what I think. Like just losing Schroeder, I think they were just like we're just going to go by committee with this. Cade's playing, 32, 33 minutes or whatever, between JI and a star. I think they're just going to go at it. We'll see how it works out. But yeah, no traditional backup point guard for this rotation.
Yeah. Anything to add there on the rotation or any of the combinations, Bryce?
Just real quick, I don't think they have that guy. Like we joked about
Yeah.
Dennis Jenkins. Dennis is the closest thing to that. I know people will look up Marcus Sasser's height, but that's not really how Marcus Sasser plays. He plays with the ball in his hands, but it's to create his own shot. Jenkins is the closest thing to that. I just think they're going to lean into JI. We've seen them lean into Asar doing some creation. And I just want to also, O2 mentioned that he thought that maybe this would have been the lineup we saw last year. I just want to make sure people understand this group of 5 didn't get to play together last year. Asar had the blood clots coming off last off season and then was not able to play early in the year. And then about the time he got back and was able to play, not only was he on a minutes restriction, but then Jaden Ivey broke his leg not long after that. So that's why we've barely seen this 5-man rotation that O2 mentioned. But I agree with him on the starting 5. I agree with him on the 9-man rotation. And then if they go 10 deep in a game, I truly think it comes down to just like the matchup in terms of, do you want to go 2 bigs in the second unit and play Stu at the 4 a little bit? Does Javonte Green get the call? Maybe it is a Sasser game. I don't see the rookie Chaz Lanier or, second year guy Bobby Klintman really being, I haven't personally seen enough or felt like the team has shown them enough to think that they're truly in that rotation right now as it sits.
Yeah, the one thing that I would be keeping an eye out for is Ivy. And I'm definitely, it was very encouraging that he shot the ball the way that he did. It was a pretty small sample. He shot 46% on uncontested threes last year, which is basically about 10% above where he had been in the past. And so he's going to need to shoot it off the drill, but he also is going to need to be a really good spot up threat. If you're thinking of Cade as the 1 and him as the 2, you're just not getting the shooting from that, just in terms of the volume, not even necessarily the percentage. You're not getting the shooting from that spot that you would expect. Even Tobias Harris he's someone who's going to get guarded out there, but he's not really hunting that 3-point shot. And, Asar, if you're thinking of him as the 3 or the 4 or vice versa, and they really are below average in terms of the volume from every spot. And so maybe it's not in the starting lineup, maybe it's the closing lineup, but do they feel like they just have to play Duncan Robinson at critical points of the game just to get enough out there, not only even in terms of spacing the floor, but also to have some diversity of stuff they can run with him coming off a hand up. So I think like that Ivy versus Robinson, or maybe, they would have to, they could also maybe put Robinson in for Tobias Harris. That would be another thing that they might consider doing. And Robinson certainly has his defensive deficiencies, so that's not a panacea at all. But that's some of the stuff that I would be thinking that JB's gonna have to sort out as the season goes along.
Nate, I was recently asked on a pod to name the 5 most important Pistons players, and you go through the young core fairly quickly, right? And then it was like, I said Duncan Robinson, and I know people are going to think I'm crazy, but we always talk ourselves into this exact same conversation of, can you imagine if on a night that Duncan Robinson isn't eligible to play, like isn't healthy or whatever, where's the floor space? Where's the volume shooter on the roster? Like, where's the proven volume shooter? And as you mentioned, like, yeah, Tobias knocks down shots, but it's not on high volume. And because of that, I think an underrated aspect of Malik Beasley's historic 3-point shooting season, you only do that if you play 82 games. And Malik played 82 games last year. So what happens if Duncan Robinson even misses 15 games, right? Where's the floor space? Do they have to lean on a Chaz Lanier? Because he's a guy that at least has the reputation and could potentially knock down shots at that level. So this is why we led off talking about the shooting and floor spacing, and why I think your point is valid in terms of how much time does Duncan Robinson play, just even with the defensive limitations, because shooting can be a real concern. And they're playing, there's non-shooters and there's bad shooters, Nate. Jalen Duren and Asar Thompson are complete non-shooters, non-floor spacers. And right now, Ron Holland is a non-floor spacer who may at least turn into a bad floor spacer. Isaiah Stewart was a non-floor spacer last year. That's 4 guys in your top 9. You got to have at least one elite shooter on the floor as much as possible around them.
Yeah, and that's why
maybe
Robinson may end up being top 6. Yeah, I'm just going to say he may end up being top 6, not top 5 on his team in minutes, just because how could you not play a guy, who shoots that well and you have no one else that can replicate his skill set? So that's kind of what I mentioned earlier. Just you lose Bees and THJ. That's just a lot of shots that, even with Duncan, they're still going to have a bit of a gap to make up there.
Hey, you mentioned the health, with Beasley, and Robinson has had moments where he's struggled to stay healthy. He's a little bit older as well. I don't know that he can play 30 minutes necessarily. I mean, there have been these Miami teams have struggled for offense too. Now, part of that is because, like Robinson, you can get away with it more on this roster because you don't also have Tyler Hero. Everyone else on this team is someone who can guard on the perimeter, probably at least reasonably well. I will say I liked what I saw from Chaz Lanier in Summer League. I'm not gonna count on him necessarily, but I do think he has a chance to contribute at least at some point, maybe not this year for these guys. Anything else that you guys are focused on here as we're going into the season?
I mean, my thing is there is a 15th roster spot, so I'm interested to see. Here's actually, I think this is the biggest question, Nate, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, and then we ended up talking about something else, but this team has to find, last year was finding out, like, who are you? Are these young guys even good at all? Like, what does this look like when you put a real team out there and all of that? And we found out Cade Cunningham, to me, is a all NBA level player. We found out, Asar Thompson can be a real impact defensively. Jalen Duren grew, all of that. Here's my biggest question that needs answered this year for the Pistons. Who is your number 2? Is the number 2 on the roster? Is it Jaden Ivey? Is it Asar Thompson? I think probably not in terms of offensive scoring load. Probably not Jalen Duren in terms of offensive scoring load. Does Ron Holland give you a little bit of a carrot to think maybe he could eventually get there? And if none of those guys are, if we don't see any of those steps, is it now the time to make the move? Is it now at the deadline? Is that the time to go make the move? You've seen enough. You're getting far enough into contract conversations and all of that. You have the full plethora of your picks back now that conveyed from the Isaiah Stewart trade. Like, now is the time that you need to really start answering that question, whether it's on the roster or you identify it off your roster and go find it.
Yeah, it would be nice to replace Tobias Harris, who is not a long-term piece for this team, with someone like Lauri Markkanen, perhaps, who I think would fit in. Now, he makes a lot of money. Would he fit into their long-term salary structure? Are you feeling okay about giving up 3 first-round picks, or maybe 3 first-round picks and Ron Holland or something like that? I think that would be sort of the minimum price to get a player like that. Now, they could also just go pick up your random 2 guard who's available for a couple of seconds at the deadline or something. They they could go that route as well if they're just like, man, we don't have enough spacing, or Robinson is not working out, or whatever. What about you, Omari? Anything else that's really standing out to you about the team before we kind of get into predicting what they're going to be this year?
Yeah, I would say broadly, like I agree with Bryce that this is the season where you kind of have to figure out those deeper questions from a roster construction standpoint. Who is our number two, this and that. A little bit more on a low key note, they have a trade exception for 14 million, and just based on how the roster is looking now, if you do use that exception at the deadline to fortify a playoff run, like you're probably gonna have to check two boxes between getting somebody who can shoot, and then you're probably either going to need ball handling help or you're going to need a four. And for 14 million, you're not getting necessarily like a long-term option there, but that exception is something that they may have to use before next July, which is when it expires, just because they do have some obvious roster deficiencies here. So just on a lower note, that's kind of what I'm looking at, right? If you're not going after like a marketing, you're going to have to do something that the deadline probably disrupt one of those weaknesses, unless JI comes back and he's still a 40% shooter, or maybe with internal growth you can avoid that. But if you want to make a deep playoff run, you're probably going to have to do something at that point. So that's on a lower note what I'm curious about.
Any other major strengths and weaknesses for these guys, right? So we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, I would say just they really did take a step forward defensively last year. And I would say, if you come into the season and you're, a top 10 defense, like I think they hovered around 10 last year, didn't they, in defensive rating? Like they were 10 or 11, I want to say. But I can see them taking a step forward there. Like, absolutely. Like Jalen Duren got better as the year went on. I thought he probably had his best defensive stretch in the playoffs. We talked about a star. We talked about Isaiah Stewart. We talked about Cade Cunningham. You have a couple minus defenders on the roster too, but overall, this is like a big physical team. And defensively, I would say maybe next season, OKC, Dallas, Orlando might be in their own bracket. But I see potential for this team to take a step forward in that regard and definitely be better, a lot better defensively than offensively. So are you looking at top 7, top 8 ceiling defensively? And if you're doing that, does that push you, a little bit closer to contender status? So, like, I just see a lot of potential for this group to be an elite defensive team if they continue along the trajectory that they're at right now.
So a year ago, they were 11th.
Yeah, they were 11th. They were right around there.
The big thing that they were really poor at was fouling. They fouled a ton.
Mm-hmm.
Young team that's aggressive. Now, they also didn't force that many turnovers.
Yeah.
I think that's something that, if Ron's going to play more, Asar going to even more of a role. Ivy's always kind of had the potential to be a disruptive defender, but outside of, the under 19 world championships when he was a prospect, we'd never really seen that from him. And I also I think they could be even better on the defensive glass. They were 9th last year. And I think they could be even better as a rim protecting team as well this year, just some incremental improvement and just playing more of these defensive guys. Because they had a lot of units last year where it's like Tobias, Malik Beasley, and Hardaway all together, right? They're not going to have any groups out there like that now. They may miss those guys offensively, but I think the defense should be able to take a step forward.
I mean, you think about that. You talk about like who's the biggest negative defender if what Jalen Duren did down the stretch last year is real and potentially even he builds off of that. I mean, I think the defender with the biggest question mark outside of Duncan Robinson, I don't know, O2, is probably J.I., right?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I mean, like we kind of know what Tobias is, and he provides value because he can at least take certain matchups physically. And I don't know, maybe he was this way younger in his career, but he has really good hands. Like he's always digging in and stuff, and he gets away with his lack of movement ability in that way. Stewart's good defensively. Asar's good defensively. Ron will at least be disruptive and hopefully even more solid in year 2. I think Karras is an interesting defender at his side. I think Cade is a good defender for being your primary scoring option. That kind of leaves J.I. as like the biggest question mark. And if he can ever match the physical tools with the actual production on the defensive end, you do, to your point, Nate, like you have a pretty good defensive infrastructure there. that could be really, really good and be really disruptive and really destroy on the defensive glass. They absolutely should be. Like Jalen Duren rebounds, Tobias defensive rebounds, Cade defensive rebounds. Asar should be one of the best wing rebounders in the NBA. They should not give up. I feel like last year, they really were bad against the best offensive rebounding teams, right? Like you'd see them getting destroyed on the glass. It's like, man, so you look up the other teams like, oh, this team's top 5 in offensive boards. They got to be better against the elite offensive rebounding teams. I feel like those are the teams that really hurt them.
Yeah, and they should be better on the offensive glass too than
Sure.
they were. Ninth a year ago. I mean, Stewart is really good there. Maybe that'll decline some if he's spacing the floor, but yeah, with some of the athletes that they have, I think they should be a group that can threaten for the top 5. I don't see them getting that much better in terms of turning the ball over. They're 21st there. They're going to try to run, which means you're going to turn it over more. They're going to have no spacing. They have underqualified second ball handlers working with no spacing. Cade has always been a high turnover guy. Now, I think that's a little bit too harsh on him because of A, what he's had to face, and B, I look more at the team turnover rate. Like Trae Young has always had a lot of individual turnovers, but he's making every single play. You'd expect that. And the overall team has a low turnover rate. That wasn't necessarily the case for Detroit a season ago. So that's not something I see getting a ton better this year.
Yeah, I would agree, right? O2, like, I mean, Jalen Duren's going to make mistakes. Asar in the role, it looks like they're going to play him in. Ron is going to make mistakes. I think I would agree with that. That what'd you say? They ended up 21st.
Yeah.
If they could get out of the bottom 10, I think I would count that as a positive, like a win based off probably what we would project right now.
Yeah, I could see there being games where they clearly missed out of the shorter type. I think he only played maybe 26, 27 games for the playoffs last season because he got here in February, but it was just noticeable when he was out there that he really kind of remedied their issues with ball control, which go way beyond last season. I mean, they were turning the ball over prolifically. The 2 seasons before that, last season was actually a bit of a step forward in that area. But like you said, they, you're a team with Cade and then no other true point guards. So either somebody's going to have to step up in that regard, or like they're just going to be turnover prone, and you probably just have to live with that.
So I did not put this on the outline. I just thought of this before we do our predictions for this team. What is you guys' biggest disagreement about this team?
Not having a backup 4-man /
Well, I'm sorry. I'm saying with each other. Like what is something that you guys have disagreed on, and you've done so many shows together? What is the thing where you guys just don't see eye to eye on with these guys?
Man, that's a good question, because I feel like we end up with a lot of the same takeaways, but there's definitely stuff we disagree with. I'm trying to think of that as like a real good one. Honestly, most of our disagreements come down to like food and like non-basketball stuff. Like we disagree.
You can give me a food disagreement.
O2 thinks he's freaking top chef over here, and
I won't say top chef, but I mean, you got to give me a little credit. Come on.
I don't. I've never had a meal that you cooked. The closest thing was you took me to a restaurant where we paid $100 and we had to cook our own meat in the middle of the table. I was like,
okay, no, we went to
I'm gonna pay
Korean barbecue place in Vegas.
And I'm gonna get sick because you're gonna undercook.
Food was delicious. I cooked it to perfection. It had like a nice char on it. No, we agree a lot on basketball. When it comes to outside of basketball, we disagree on probably 80%.
He puts chips on sandwiches. This is where it all started, because I have never tried potato chips on a sandwich.
That's a classic
I
combination.
don't know. If you have a really shitty sandwich, maybe chips could improve it.
Sure. It's a texture thing. It has a little crunch.
Oh my God. This is what I'm talking about, Nate. He's like, there's a texture and there's a contrast of this with that. And
how about like getting some crunch out of the bread? Maybe that's
exactly.
Hey,
you see the vision.
What kind of sandwiches are we talking about here that you're putting chips on?
Just like a plain, like it just be turkey and cheese, mayo, like just put some
like a homemade sandwich with some white bread or something like that.
Yeah, like lunch pail sandwich, Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I think that's totally acceptable. If you're going with you're getting like a good artisan sandwich. I don't even know what the word artisan means, but whatever. Yeah, that I think you probably don't want to pollute it with some chips. But yeah, especially if you're going like especially like taking it to work or something like that. You're not like the toasting isn't really an option. Yeah, I think that's solid. Are you going like, ruffled, like thick kettle chips, or more like, a traditional Lay's kind
I
of?
mean, I'm not
I could
doing
go for a
any
good
of it
kettle
because
chip.
I refuse
Yeah.
to do this.
I like kettle chips. Like they're nice. Like they have extra crunch. Like they're salty. I can get behind a good kettle chip for sure. I'm not a big Lay's guy. Like we have Better Made here in
Okay.
Detroit. I'm taking Better Made over Lay's every time.
The other
Yeah,
thing we
now
disagree on is yards.
Well,
yards,
I'm,
like the yard of your house.
Yeah, like lawn care.
like I'm just anti-lawn. Period. Like I think it's a waste.
Oh yeah,
of time.
no, they suck. What a waste of time.
Yeah, like to me, it's just like a battle between you and your neighbors because nobody wants to have the worst line because then you look like a slob. So I think that's where it comes from.
Then win.
But you can just
I
opt out of
win.
it too.
My
you
lawn
just opt out
wins.
of it though.
And then I bully and peer pressure my neighbors to take care of their lawns as well.
But you have 3 kids. You're on multiple podcasts. Like you're a busy man. Like there's just no way to line like compared to everything else you have in your life. Like it's just taken away. Like it's taken away.
No, it's not. It takes us like an hour and a half every Saturday. And
That's a long time on a Saturday.
It's very relaxing. I put in a podcast like Dunc'd On. I listen to it.
No,
and
it's because he has.
Are you
the
trying to
3
butter
kids.
Nate up? Like I don't doubt you do that. But well, that's also true.
That's why though he has the 3 kids. So you throw the headphones in. Do you have like the riding mower?
Oh no. It doesn't leave the lines as looking good. So you push mow it so the lines look better, and you alternate which direction you cut it every week, and all of that.
Okay. All right. That's I mean, everyone it's it's like it was ASMR before ASMR YouTube videos like came out, right? Like that's that's what that is. All right, let's get back to our predictions here. I will go first. I'm just worried about their offense overall. I do think they'll be good running. Hopefully they can get better on the offensive glass, but half court offense, and particularly if Cade's off the floor, particularly if Cade misses some time. I'm not worried about like that shin thing, but like guys, he was real healthy last year. There's just going to be a massive load on him. So yeah, I mean, it's just a concern for me, their half court offense overall. And I think they may even get to the point where they have to make some changes in season because of that, because they've been a little bit disappointing. Like I don't think these guys are going to get blown out in many games because their effort level is going to be really high with some of the things that we talked about. So I think that they're going to be kind of right about where they were last year. I think the Beasley just was so good for them, and replacing that production, and everyone else is going to have to be so much better than they were. And maybe they can be better defensively than they were a year ago because they're playing different personnel and everyone's a year older and stuff like that. But I kind of see these guys as maybe like the number 10 defense. If I'm going to give them some upside, it would be on that side of the ball, and then being below average on the offensive end. Probably in like the 17, 18 type of range. I'm a little lower on them honestly after talking about it. So I'm going to go with a 43 win season for these guys, which I think will be a little disappointing locally if that comes to pass.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more optimistic while I share all of your same concerns. I think my belief in Cade Cunningham, and then the other thing I believe, Nate, is if we get to a certain point and the offense is that much of a slog, I do think Trajan makes a move. Like I think he wants to continue to push this thing forward, whether that means like a second round of the playoffs or whatever. But I think they're in the time frame now of we've collected all the data. We've collected a lot of the data on the young guys, and it's okay to make a move now if it's not looking the way you want. So I have them as the 5th seed in the East. I recently did a little thing where I just went back and looked at the average win totals for each seed in the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference. That tells me over the last 4 years, the average win total for the 5th seed is 47.5. I don't know that they quite get there, but their over under is 45.5. I will go slightly over. So I'm right there around 46 wins, something like that, and the 5th seed in the East.
Omari?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have them like within the same range, within 44 wins. I think they do have a winning record. I don't see them regressing or anything, but we've talked about it all episode, but yeah, they lost a lot of shooting. I think they're going to miss Beasley and THJ, for various reasons. Although I will add that, they could offer Bees Davis non-bird rights. They could offer him a salary starting at $7.2 million. I don't know if he's going to get much more than that. So, I'm just saying, maybe there's a break out the glass opportunity there at some point, but yeah, like shooting's going to be a question mark until somebody internally shows that like they could at least get to a certain threshold. And yeah, if Ji comes back and it doesn't have to be 40%. I mean, if he's just 37%, like a pretty good volume, I think that does fix a lot of that. But for them to really take a substantial step forward, like it can't just be defense. Like as you guys said, they're gonna have to shoot the ball well, and like that offense is gonna have to be, probably somewhere between 10 and 14 for them to really, have a chance at being top 4 in the East. I think a lot of people are picking Atlanta to be a little bit better, and I think offensively they can shoot it a little bit better, or maybe more than a little bit better. You have Trae Young, you have Kristaps, you've got Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So yeah, I'm just going to guess 44 wins. I think they stay about the same. I think there'll be some regression here. I think there'll be some improvement there, and they'll go into next summer, with a very clear game plan of like what they need to attack. But they are still in evaluation mode a little bit this season, just because Asar and Ji, just had very irregular seasons last year.
All right. Well, there's a huge basketball disagreement for you. Bryce has 45 wins, and you have 44. Now, next time you can answer that question. All right. Well, where can we keep up with everything y'all are doing this season?
Yeah, I mean, my work is over at the Detroit Free Press. That's freep.com. And of course, me and Bryce, we have the Pistons Post podcast, and we release that once a week. So, definitely tap in. We like to record live. So feel free to join us on YouTube, shoot us some questions. We try to answer most of them. So
and then you can find me at Motor City Hoops on Twitter, Blue Sky. I have a Substack where I have raw notes and analysis. It's a free Substack. If your team plays the Pistons, it might interest you. And then, of course, I'm over on Game Theory podcast as well with Sam Vecini doing his podcast. And we recently started a Substack as well. And I do some video breakdowns over there. So I've done stuff on some of the 2025 NBA draft prospects already, as well as some of the rookies. My most recent video breakdown was on Dylan Harper's recent preseason game for the Spurs. So check that out if you get a chance also.
Yeah, I saw that in my inbox. I got it starred, and looking forward to watching that one. And of course, hopefully I'll be making an appearance or two on Pistons Pulse.
Of course.
Season,
so 100%.
Absolutely.
You guys look out for that. And thanks everyone for watching here on Dunc'd On and Dunc'd On Prime. We are having a 35% off sale if you want to sign up for a year membership, which is already much cheaper than the monthly membership. You can get 35% off that yearly membership at Dunc'd On Prime. That'll be going through the start of the season. Got a lot of exciting stuff happening at Dunc'd On this year. So please consider signing up for Dunc'd On Prime. Talk to y'all again next time.